My father stood at the head of the table, champagne flute raised, and said the 6 words that I will never forget for as long as I live. He looked at my sister and he said, "You did it all on your own." 43 people applauded. Glasses clinked. My mother dabbed her eye with a white cloth napkin. My sister, Celine, stood up and pressed both hands to her heart like she was receiving an award. And I was sitting 4 seats down, still holding my fork, watching the room celebrate a story I had personally funded for 4 years. I didn't stand up. I didn't say a word. I just set my fork down, very slowly, and placed both hands flat on the tablecloth. What I had in the tote bag hanging off my chair that night, you'll understand why I brought it. When I get there. I'll get there. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story genuinely connects with you. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from. It means more than you know. My name is Nadia. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of what happens when you become someone's secret. I grew up in Caldwell, Ohio. Not the kind of small town people romanticize, no charming Main Street, no covered bridge on a postcard. Just a grid of streets off Route 78, a Dollar General, a diner called the Sunrise that stopped serving breakfast at 10:30 sharp, and about 11,000 people who mostly knew each other's business and carefully avoided discussing it. My parents' house is on Ferris Lane. White aluminum siding. A front porch that my father has been meaning to rest in since 2014. 2 giant silver maples in the yard that drop their seeds every May like a second snowfall. I know every corner of that house. I know which step creaks on the staircase, the 4th one from the bottom. I know that the bathroom door on the 2nd floor has to be lifted slightly when you turn the handle or it won't open. I know that my mother keeps her important papers in a fireproof lockbox under the guest bed, and that she's had the same combination since I was 12, my sister's birthday. Not mine. My sister's. I want to be careful here, because I'm not telling you this to make you hate my mother. My mother is a woman who was shaped by a world that told her to center the beautiful one, the charming one, the one who lit up every room she walked into. She made a choice a long time ago about which daughter to invest in, and she made it so naturally that I don't think she ever fully noticed she was making it. My name is Nadia. I'm the older one. I'm the one who got a 3.9 GPA and a civil engineering degree from Ohio State and a job at a firm in Columbus before I was 23. I'm the one who wore sensible shoes to prom because I knew I'd be on my feet all night helping coordinate the setup. I'm the one who drove my sister to every orthodontist appointment from the time she was 14 because my mother worked the 2 to 10 shift at the hospital and my father said his back was acting up. My sister's name is Celine. She's 26 now. She has my mother's cheekbones and my father's laugh, which is to say she has everything you notice first in a room. She wanted to study fashion merchandising at Whitmore University in Cincinnati, which is a private school, which means it costs money that our family did not have. She got in on a partial scholarship. 40% tuition covered. The rest, 60%, was approximately $18,600 per year. For 4 years. That's $74,400. Our parents couldn't cover it. My father drives a delivery truck and my mother is a CNA. I was 27 when Celine got her acceptance letter. I had been working at Halverson and Reed Engineering for 4 years by then. I had savings. Not extravagant savings. I was living in a one-bedroom apartment on Medina Drive in Columbus, eating lunch at my desk most days. Driving a 2016 Civic that I'd paid off the previous spring. But I had savings. My mother called me on a Sunday evening in late March. I remember I was eating soup at my kitchen counter and watching something forgettable on my laptop. She asked if we could talk about Celine. I said yes. And she said, very carefully, the way she says things, she's already decided, your sister has an opportunity that might never come again. She laid it out plainly. The gap in funding. The timeline. The fact that Celine had already told everyone in Caldwell she was going to Whitmore. The fact that she'd taken photos with her acceptance letter and her roommate-to-be and posted them on Facebook, and that 47 people had liked it, including my father's boss and our Aunt Rosemary and the pastor of the church my parents still attended despite not going regularly. She said, I'm asking you to help. I asked how much. She told me. I didn't say yes right away. I sat with it for a week. I looked at my own savings, my own plans. I'd been thinking about buying a small house. Not a grand plan. Just a starter home. Somewhere to put down roots after years of apartment living. I had just over $90,000 saved at that point. I was proud of that number. I'd gotten there through 4 years of careful decisions and overtime and never once taking a vacation that cost more than a long weekend. I said yes. My mother cried. She said it was a loan. She said they'd pay me back. She said, and I remember this exactly because I wrote it down that night in the Notes app on my phone, this stays between us. Celine works hard. She doesn't need to feel like a charity case. It'll be better if she thinks she managed this herself. I understood what she was asking. I agreed to it. That part, agreeing to it, is the part I've had to sit with most. I want you to understand, I didn't do it to be a martyr. I did it because I love my sister, genuinely. And because my mother asked me to, and because I was 27 years old and I still believed that invisible support was a form of love. I believed that doing good things quietly was its own reward. I believed the family would know, eventually, in some unspoken way, what I had given. I set up a separate savings account at a different bank. I named it, in a small private joke to myself, CFF, Celine's Future Fund. Every semester, my mother would text me the exact amount due. I would wire it to an account my mother had opened specifically for tuition payments. My mother would route it through and make the payment. On paper, it looked like my parents were paying. To Celine, that's exactly what it looked like. The arrangement ran like clockwork for 4 years. 8 semesters. My mother texted me the first week of August and the first week of January, every year, without fail. The amounts varied slightly. One semester was $19,200 because of a fee increase, one was $17,800, but the rhythm never changed. I wired the money. My mother paid the bill. I went back to my life. I bought a smaller house than I'd planned. A 2-bedroom on Carver Street in Columbus, with a back porch that needed new boards and a kitchen that still had the original 1987 laminate countertops. I liked it anyway. I refinished the porch boards myself over a single long weekend. In October, wearing my old Ohio State sweatshirt and listening to a podcast about structural engineering. It felt, I remember thinking, like I was building something that was truly mine. Celine graduated in the top 20% of her class at Whitmore. She had a job lined up in Chicago at a buying office for a mid-size retail chain. She had an apartment picked out with 2 friends from school. She was, by any measure, launched. My parents threw her a graduation party. Not a small backyard thing, a proper party. They rented the event room at the Caldwell Grange Hall on County Road 12. They hired a caterer. They ordered a custom cake from Mercer's Bakery with a cap and gown fondant figure on top. My mother wore a dress she'd ordered specifically for the occasion, pale green with a floral print, and I know it was new. Because when I arrived she turned around to show me the tag was still on the inside seam and she laughed and asked me to pull it off. I drove down from Columbus on a Saturday morning in May. The drive is about 2.5 hours. I'd brought a gift, a leather portfolio set and a card with handwritten notes about things I wished I'd known starting out. I'd also brought the tote bag. The tote bag was black canvas, the kind I used to carry files to site visits. Inside it was a manila folder. Inside the folder was a set of documents, 8 wire transfer confirmations, 1 for each semester, totaling $74,400. Printed clean, time-stamped, notarized as true copies by a notary in Columbus the previous Tuesday. Behind those was a printed email thread, 31 emails. Between my mother and me, beginning in March 4 years earlier, in which she had asked, I had agreed, and the terms had been laid out in plain language. Behind that was a single-page summary document I'd typed myself, 1 column of dates, 1 column of amounts, 1 column of confirmation numbers. I wasn't planning to use it. I brought it the way you carry an umbrella on a day that might turn. Just in case. The Grange Hall was full by the time I arrived at 6. Folding tables covered in white tablecloths. Balloon arch in Whitmore's school colors, navy and gold, framing the entrance. 43 guests, by my count, because I'm an engineer and I count things. My mother's friends from the hospital. My father's brother, my Uncle Terence, who drove in from Dayton with his wife Marlena. Neighbors from Ferris Lane. Celine's friends from high school, including her best friend Justine, who had sent my sister off with a custom sash that said self-made. I saw that sash and I thought, okay. I found my seat. Table 4, in the middle of the room, between my Aunt Marlena and a woman named Phoebe who worked with my mother. I set my tote bag on the back of my chair. I ordered a sparkling water. I watched my sister move through the room like she owned it, which to be fair, she did. It was her night, and she was radiant, and I was proud of her in the complicated way you're proud of something you helped build that doesn't have your name on it. Dinner was served around 7:30. Chicken marsala and green beans and rolls that were slightly overdone, but nobody mentioned it. I ate. I talked to Marlena about her garden, which she takes very seriously and I find genuinely interesting. I talked to Phoebe about the hospital system's new scheduling software, which she found oppressive and I found, privately, poorly designed. At 8:15, my father stood up. He's not a man given to speeches. He's quiet by nature, my father, a good man, I've always believed, shaped by a preference for comfort over confrontation. He cleared his throat twice. He reached for his champagne flute. He waited for the room to settle. And then he said it. I want to toast my daughter Celine, who worked harder than anyone I've ever known, who put herself through one of the best schools in this state, who never once asked anyone for help, and who proved that if you put your head down and believe in yourself, you can do anything. He paused. His voice caught genuine emotion. You did it all on your own, sweetheart. You really did. The room erupted. 43 people. Glasses raised. My mother crying into her napkin. Celine. On her feet, hands over her heart, eyes bright. I sat completely still. I watched my mother look at my father, and then across the room at me, and for 1/2 second our eyes met. Hers shifted away immediately. Back to Celine. Back to her napkin. I set my fork down. I placed both hands flat on the tablecloth, felt the cool smoothness of the cloth under my palms. And I breathed once, slowly, from the bottom of my lungs. My Uncle Terence, next to me now, Marlena had traded seats with him after dinner, leaned over and said quietly, "You okay?" I said, "I'm fine." He looked at me for a moment. Terence is my father's older brother, 61 years old, retired from the postal service, and he has a quality I have always valued in people: he notices things. Not intrusively. Just quietly. He notices and he files it away. He said, "You sure?" I said, "Not entirely, no." He didn't push. He just nodded and sat back, and I understood that whatever happened next, he had seen my face in the moment my father gave that toast. The speeches continued. Celine's high school friend Marcus gave a rambling and affectionate roast. Justine made everyone cry with a genuine tribute. My mother spoke briefly, praising Celine's resilience and beauty and work ethic, and I noticed, I am always noticing, that she did not mention me at all. Not in passing. Not to say, her sister supported her every step of the way, which would have cost nothing and meant everything. Not even a glancing reference to family support, the generic kind. Nothing. My name did not exist in that room. I had paid for the room. Not the rental, my parents had rented the hall, but I had paid for 4 years of the reason the room existed. Every semester of the degree being celebrated. Every credit hour. The internship that Celine got because her GPA was high enough to qualify. Which it was because she attended a school where she could focus, which she could because her tuition was covered. I waited until the room had moved into the dessert phase, the cake being cut, the noise level rising again to the comfortable blur of a party in its final hour. I excused myself from the table and walked to the small hallway near the back of the hall where the coat hooks were. I took out my phone. I texted my mother. I said, "I need 5 minutes with you tonight before I drive home. Just you and me. I'm not looking for a confrontation. I just need something acknowledged." She read it. I watched the read receipt appear. She did not respond. I went back to the table. Celine found me around 8:45, during the cake. She came around the table and hugged me from behind, her arms around my shoulders, and said, "I'm so glad you came. Nadia. I know it's a long drive." I held her hands for a moment where they crossed in front of me. I said, "I wouldn't have missed it." She said, "Are you staying tonight?" Meaning at the house on Ferris Lane. I said, "I'll probably drive back tonight." She pulled back and looked at me. "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm proud of you, Celine. Genuinely." She smiled. She believed me. She should have, I meant it. And she went back to her side of the room, trailing gold balloon ribbon, and I watched her go. I looked at the tote bag on the back of my chair. I was going to leave. I had decided, approximately 20 minutes earlier, to simply go home. To let the night be what it was. To accept that this was how my family operated, that this was the currency of being the reliable one, the invisible one, and that I had chosen this arrangement with full knowledge, or at least the knowledge I had at 27, and that making a scene at my sister's graduation party would only confirm every narrative my mother had ever written about who I was, the serious one, the difficult one, the one who couldn't just let things be. And then my mother spoke. She had come around to my side of the room, probably to find Celine, and she paused behind me, and she was talking to Phoebe, her colleague, about 2 feet to my left. I was not looking at her. I was looking at my cake plate. Phoebe said, "You must be so proud. The way she just handled everything herself, that's remarkable, honestly. Not every kid can do that." My mother said, "She really did. That's just who Celine is. She never wanted a handout from anyone. We offered help, of course, but she always found her own way." 3 seconds of silence inside my chest. I turned my head and looked at my mother. She saw me looking. Her expression didn't change, she's too practiced for that, but there was a slight stiffening in her posture, a barely perceptible recalibration. Phoebe was smiling, oblivious. "That's just beautiful. You raised her right." My mother said, "We tried our best." I turned back to my cake. I picked up my fork. I set it back down. I thought about the 2016 Civic I'd driven for 3 extra years so I could wire money every August and every January. I thought about the house on Carver Street, the smaller house, the one with the laminate countertops I'd never replaced. Because I kept telling myself I'd get to it eventually. I thought about the 4 separate times in those 4 years that my parents had come to me with other financial asks, a car repair, an emergency medical bill, a shortfall 1 month between paychecks, and I had helped with those too, less formally, because I was the one with room in my life to help. I thought about the combination on the lockbox under the guest bed. My sister's birthday. I reached into the tote bag. I picked up my fork. I set it back down. I thought about the 2016 Civic I'd driven for 3 extra years so I could wire money every August and every January. I thought about the house on Carver Street, the smaller house, the one with the laminate countertops I'd never replaced. Because I kept telling myself I'd get to it eventually. I thought about the 4 separate times in those 4 years that my parents had come to me with other financial asks, a car repair, an emergency medical bill, a shortfall 1 month between paychecks, and I had helped with those too, less formally, because I was the one with room in my life to help. I thought about the combination on the lockbox under the guest bed. My sister's birthday. I reached into the tote bag. I didn't make an announcement. I didn't stand up or raise my voice or tap a glass. I simply took the manila folder out of the bag and I walked to the table where my mother was now standing. The one near the front where the gift display had been set up, and I set the folder on the table in front of her. Quietly. Like I was delivering a project brief. I said, "I need you to look at what's in here." She looked at the folder. She looked at me. Phoebe had taken a small, instinctive step back. Not far, just enough. My mother opened the folder. She looked at the first page, the wire transfer summary. Her expression didn't collapse all at once, it moved through several small adjustments, the way ice shifts on a warming lake. First confusion, performative. Then recognition. Then something harder to name, not guilt exactly, but the look of someone realizing that an arrangement they'd managed in their minds as manageable was now, suddenly, on paper. She said, very low, "Nadia." I said, "I don't need an apology tonight. I know this is Celine's night. But I need you to understand that I know what was said tonight. And I need you to understand that I have documentation of what actually happened. My father had appeared at my mother's elbow. He'd noticed the quiet cluster of us, the tension. He looked at the folder. He looked at me. He said, "What's going on?" I said, "Dad. I paid Celine's tuition. For 4 years. All of it. Mom asked me to, and I agreed, and I kept it quiet because that's what she asked. I'm not angry at Celine. I'm not angry at you. But when you stood up tonight and said she did it all on her own, without anyone's help, I need you to know that wasn't true. And I need Mom to know that I have the records." My father went very still. My Uncle Terence was 3 tables away. He had turned toward us. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he was watching. My mother said, quietly, "This is not the place." I said, "I know. That's why I'm not making it the place. I'm showing you this privately. I'm asking you, privately, to think about what was said tonight and what you want to do about it. That's all." I reached out and closed the folder. I said, "Congratulations on Celine's graduation. I mean that." And I picked up my tote bag, and I said goodnight to Marlena, and I hugged Celine once more. She smelled like the perfume my mother had given her last Christmas, something floral and clean, and she squeezed me hard and said she loved me, and I walked out of the Caldwell Grange Hall into the May night air. The parking lot smelled like cut grass and gravel dust. The sky was the deep purple gray of late spring evenings when the light has gone but hasn't quite taken all of its color with it. I stood by my car for a moment, keys in hand, and I breathed. A door had closed. Not slammed. Just swung shut, with the quiet click of a latch finding its seat. I drove back to Columbus. 2.5 hours on a road I knew by heart, past the exits I'd memorized, past the rest stop at mile marker 87, past the industrial corridor outside Chillicothe. That smells like iron in damp weather. I listened to nothing. The radio stayed off. I just drove, and I let the miles accumulate, and by the time I pulled onto Carver Street and parked in front of my house with the back porch boards I'd refinished myself, I felt, strange as it sounds, lighter. Not happy. Not resolved. Just lighter. I went inside. I made chamomile tea. I sat at my kitchen table with the folder in front of me and I read through the documents one more time, not because I needed to confirm anything but because I wanted to hold what was real. The numbers were real. The dates were real. The emails, 31 of them, were real. I wasn't a ghost. I had receipts. My phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. It was my Uncle Terence. He said, "I saw your face when your dad gave that toast." I didn't understand it then. I think I might now. Call me when you're ready to talk. No rush. I set the phone down. I thought about what I wanted. This is what I've come to understand about the particular kind of hurt that comes from being made invisible by people who love you. It's not clean. It doesn't arrive as outrage. It arrives as a slow, ambient wrongness, a friction you've learned to breathe through, that you've mistaken for your own personality, your seriousness, your self-sufficiency, your capacity for solitude. You've built an identity around bearing it. And then one night someone says 6 words in a rented Grange Hall and the friction has a name. I didn't want to blow up my family. I genuinely didn't. But I also knew, sitting at that kitchen table on Carver Street, that I was done being a secret. My mother called the next morning. Sunday. 10:15. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was, "I'll give her this," more honest than I expected, Nadia. I know last night was hard. I know what we're asking you has been hard. Your father and I talked last night after you left. We need to have a real conversation. Not over the phone. I want to come to Columbus, or you can come here, whatever you prefer. But we need to talk, the three of us. I think you deserve that. I know I should have said that a long time ago. I listened to the voicemail twice. The word she used, deserve, landed somewhere specific inside me. It landed in the place where I'd filed every August and January text, every wire confirmation, every year of quiet and good faith. I called her back. I said, "Come to Columbus next Saturday. I'll make lunch." She said, "Okay." She came alone. My father stayed in Caldwell. I found out later he'd asked to come and she'd said she needed to do this first, the two of them, which I think was right. She arrived at noon in her good coat, the navy one, holding a tin of the coffee cake she makes from a recipe that's been in her family since her grandmother brought it from Hungary in 1963. She held it out to me at the door the way people offer things when they don't know how to say what they came to say. I took the tin. I said, "Come in." We sat at the kitchen table. I'd made soup, chicken and vegetables, simple. I poured 2 glasses of water. I put the manila folder on the table between us, not as a weapon, just as an object. A fact. My mother looked at it and said, "I owe you an apology that I should have given you a long time ago." I didn't say anything. I let her say what she'd come to say. She said, "When I asked you to help Celine, I told myself it was the practical thing. You had the money and we didn't, and the window was short and Celine needed it. I told myself the arrangement made sense. And I told myself that keeping it between us was protecting Celine's dignity." She paused. "But I know, if I'm being honest, and I'm trying to be honest, that I also wanted it that way because it was easier. Because Celine didn't have to feel like she owed anyone anything. Because your father and I could watch her succeed without it being complicated. I made you invisible to make things easier for everyone else. And that was wrong. That was deeply wrong, Nadia." I looked at my mother for a moment. At the coffee cake tin on the counter. At the kitchen table. Where I sat alone most mornings with my coffee, in the house I'd bought smaller than I'd planned. I said, "I need you to tell Celine." My mother's expression shifted. This was the part she hadn't fully steeled herself for. I said, "Not because I want her to feel guilty. But because she's building her whole identity around something that isn't true. She's going to tell that story, the self-made story, for the rest of her life. To employers. To friends. To her own children someday. And it's going to be built on a lie that I agreed to, and I'm not willing to let it keep going." My mother said, "She might be angry." I said, "She might be." My mother said, "At me. Or at you." I said, "Either way, she deserves to know the truth." Silence. Then my mother said, very quietly, "You're right." The conversation lasted 2 more hours. We talked about the money. My mother said they wanted to repay me, that they'd discussed it, that they would set up a formal arrangement with a payment schedule. I said we could talk about that later. I said what mattered right now was the other thing. I said, "I don't need a parade. I don't need credit at a party. I just need to not be invisible inside my own family." My mother set her hand on the table, not quite touching mine. An offering, not quite given. She said, I hear you. It's not the most satisfying ending, I know. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation in front of 43 people. There was no gasping crowd. There was no moment where Celine collapsed in grateful tears and my father made a revised speech. Real life doesn't usually give you those things. What happened was slower and less cinematic. My mother told Celine the following week, in a phone call that Celine told me later lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes. Celine called me the day after. She was quiet for a long time at the start of the call, the kind of quiet that has weight and texture. Then she said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I said, "Because Mom asked me not to. And because you were 22 and you needed to believe you could do it, and I loved you enough to let you believe that." Celine said, "That's the most unfair thing I've ever heard." I said, "Yeah. A little bit." She cried. I didn't, not on that call. I'd done my crying in the car on the drive home from Caldwell, alone on the highway in the dark where nobody could see. But I held the phone and I let her be sad, and I told her I was proud of her degree and meant it, and that none of what she'd built in her career was diminished by knowing the truth of how she'd gotten there. She said, "I want to pay you back." I said, "You don't have to do that right now." She said, "I want to." I said, "Okay. When you're ready." My Uncle Terence called that Tuesday. I'd been waiting for a quiet moment to call him back, and he beat me to it. I told him the whole thing. He listened without interrupting, which is a quality I've always admired in him. When I was done, he said, "Your grandmother would have been furious." I laughed. Actually laughed. He was right. My father's mother, who died when I was 19, was a woman who had very little patience for the quiet management of women's contributions. She'd grown up working on her family's dairy farm in Ashland County and was paid in room and board while her brothers drew a wage, and she never forgot it and never stopped mentioning it. Terence said, "She would have been proud of you too. For doing it and for not letting it stay buried." I said, "Thanks, Terence." He said, "You're a good one, kid. You always were." My father came to Columbus 3 weeks later. He drove up on a Wednesday afternoon, which is not something he does. Driving to Columbus on a weekday is a disruption in his life, and I understood it as a deliberate act. He sat at my kitchen table. He looked at the folder, which I'd left on the counter. He asked if he could look at it. I said yes. He went through it slowly. All 8 wire confirmations. The email thread. The summary page. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he looked up, his eyes were red at the corners, not quite crying but close. He said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." He said, "Your mother should have told me." I said, "She should have." He said, "And I should have been more." He stopped. Started again. I gave that toast. I stood up in front of everyone and said things that weren't true and didn't know they weren't true, and that's on your mother, but it's also on me for not knowing my own family better. For not knowing what my own daughter had done. I said, "Dad." He looked at me. I said, "I didn't need the toast. I never needed the toast. I just needed to not be told the toast was for someone else." He didn't have an answer for that. There isn't really one. He stayed for an hour and a half. He ate the lunch I made. He helped me bring in a bag of mulch from my car that I'd been meaning to move for 2 weeks. On his way out, He stopped on the porch I'd refinished. And ran his hand along the railing and said, "You did good work here." It was the smallest thing. 2.5 seconds. I said, "Thank you, Dad." I watched him drive away. The silver maple in my neighbor's yard was just starting to drop its seeds, the spinning helicopter seeds that had always, since childhood, seemed like they were trying to get somewhere. I watched them turn in the air and I thought, some of them will find ground. Not all of them. But some. It's been 7 months since the graduation party. Some things have changed. Some things haven't. My parents are paying me back in monthly installments. We set up an actual agreement. Typed, signed, kept in the folder alongside the other documents. The amount per month is modest. At this rate it will take 11 years. I don't have strong feelings about the money anymore. I earned it and I gave it and I'd probably do it again, which tells you something about how I'm built, or maybe just about how I still feel about my sister. Celine and I talk more now than we ever did. Real conversations, not the maintenance calls we'd been having for years. She's building her career in Chicago, doing well, and she calls me sometimes just to think out loud, and I think that's the closest thing to a restoration I could have hoped for. She brought it up once, the money, the arrangement, and said she was still trying to figure out how to feel about it. I said, "Take your time." She said, "Does it change how you see me?" I said, "No. Not even a little." She was quiet, and then she said, "Okay. I believe you." And I think she did. My mother and I are in the in-between space. Not estranged, not close. She calls on Sundays. We talk about the garden and her co-workers and sometimes Celine. We don't talk about the folder. I don't think we need to. The folder says what it needed to say. My Uncle Terence and I have Sunday afternoon phone calls now, which is something that didn't exist before May. We talk about a lot of things. He tells me stories about my grandmother. About the farm, about her particular brand of furious dignity. I find them nourishing. I'm collecting them. There's a thing that happens, I've learned, when you've been made invisible for a long time and then you stop allowing it. A quiet repositioning. People don't always know how to hold you when you're no longer the shape they expected. Some of them step back. Some of them, unexpectedly, step forward. My house on Carver Street still has the 1987 laminate countertops. I keep meaning to replace them. Every few weekends I look at tile samples and then put them back. I think I'm waiting for a day when I want to do it for entirely my own reasons, with no math attached to it, no secondary calculation about what I can spare. That day is coming. I can feel it getting closer. I don't need a toast. I never did. But I do need my name to exist in rooms I helped build. I think that's the smallest, most non-negotiable thing. Have you ever found yourself holding up something that everyone else was celebrating? Holding the actual beams of it, and been asked to do it from outside the frame? Drop your location in the comments, and tell me, how do you know when it's time to step into the picture? I'm Nadia. I'm 31 years old. And I exist.